On a quiet weekday morning in the United States, a routine moment turned into the beginning of a criminal case that would later unfold across police reports, court filings, and sworn testimony. The incident did not begin with flashing lights or raised voices. It began with an absence. A child who should have been visible was suddenly missing from where they were last expected to be. Within minutes, concern escalated into urgency. According to official records, the first call to emergency services was logged shortly after the disappearance was noticed. Dispatch notes describe confusion, fragmented details, and a rapidly changing situation. Officers were sent to the location immediately. When police arrived, they documented the scene exactly as they found it. Doors, windows, lighting conditions, and the positions of personal items were all recorded. Nothing appeared forced. Nothing appeared obviously disturbed. That detail would later become central to the investigation. Initial interviews were conducted on site. Statements were taken separately. Times, movements, and explanations were written down word for word. At this stage, no one was officially considered a suspect. Search efforts began within the first hour. Neighbors were questioned. Nearby streets were canvassed. Surveillance cameras from surrounding properties were identified and secured. Patrol units expanded the search radius block by block. As hours passed with no result, the case was elevated. Detectives were assigned. A missing person alert was prepared. Internal memos show that investigators quickly narrowed their focus to the last confirmed point of contact. Phone records were subpoenaed. Location data was requested. Digital timelines were constructed using call logs, messages, and app activity. Investigators compared these records against the verbal statements already given. Discrepancies began to appear. One timeline did not align with device data. A claimed movement conflicted with a camera timestamp. A gap of unexplained minutes became a gap of unexplained hours. At this point, the case shifted. Search operations continued, but the investigation moved inward. Focus turned to behavior, prior history, and relational dynamics. Court documents later noted changes in tone during follow-up interviews. Answers became shorter. Details became inconsistent. A warrant was requested. The affidavit supporting that warrant outlined probable cause based on digital evidence, witness statements, and inconsistencies in earlier accounts. A judge signed the order the same day. What investigators found next would permanently alter the direction of the case. Items recovered during the search were cataloged, photographed, and bagged. Each item was logged with time, location, and officer identification. Some objects appeared ordinary. Others immediately raised concern. Forensic teams were brought in. Samples were collected. Laboratory analysis was requested on multiple materials. Chain of custody documentation shows no gaps. Meanwhile, prosecutors were notified. Internal communications reveal early discussions about potential charges, though no arrest had yet been made. The media became aware of the case as police activity increased. News helicopters captured aerial footage. Reporters gathered outside taped-off areas. Official statements remained brief and controlled. Behind the scenes, investigators continued building their case. Autopsy reports, forensic results, and expert opinions began arriving. Each new document added weight to the narrative forming inside the case file. What had once been a missing person investigation was now something far more serious. A person of interest was identified. That designation alone did not mean guilt. It meant attention. Surveillance was authorized. Movements were tracked. Financial records were examined. Prior incidents were reviewed. Prosecutors later stated that this phase was critical. It was where evidence either connected cleanly or fell apart under scrutiny. Then came the arrest. The arrest report details the time, location, and basis for custody. The suspect was read their rights. No resistance was recorded. The booking process was completed without incident. Charges were filed shortly after. Court records show the initial appearance took place within 24 hours. Bail was addressed. The judge reviewed the affidavit line by line. The courtroom was silent as the charges were formally read. What followed would be months of legal maneuvering, expert testimony, and courtroom argument. But everything that came later rested on what happened in those first hours. The calls, the timelines, the evidence, the decisions made before anyone knew how large the case would become. And as the prosecution prepared to present its theory, one question remained central. What actually happened in the moments no one could see? As investigators reconstructed the timeline, attention narrowed to a specific window of time when events shifted from ordinary to irreversible. Court filings show that during this period, multiple digital signals stopped aligning. A phone that should have been active went silent. A device that normally pinged consistent locations suddenly registered movement inconsistent with prior patterns. Detectives focused on that gap. Using traffic cameras, license plate readers, and private security footage, analysts mapped every confirmed movement connected to the individuals involved. The process was methodical, frame by frame, minute by minute. One vehicle appeared on camera at a time that conflicted with an earlier statement. Another camera placed the same vehicle miles away shortly afterward. The route between those points raised immediate questions. Investigators returned to witnesses. This time, interviews were conducted under recorded conditions. Statements were no longer informal. Each response was preserved, reviewed, and compared against physical and digital evidence. Language analysis later presented in court showed subtle but significant changes. Verbs shifted tense. Certainty softened into possibility. Details once volunteered now had to be prompted. These shifts did not prove guilt, but they mattered. Forensic results added another layer. Lab reports confirmed the presence of biological material in locations previously described as irrelevant. The quantity, placement, and condition of the material contradicted earlier explanations. Experts would later testify that these findings could not be accidental. As evidence accumulated, prosecutors began shaping their theory. According to pretrial motions, the state believed the crime unfolded in stages rather than a single moment. This mattered legally. Intent, opportunity, and action had to be demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt. Each element required support. Each had to survive cross-examination. Defense attorneys entered the case aggressively. Motions were filed challenging the admissibility of evidence, the legality of searches, and the interpretation of forensic findings. Hearings stretched for weeks. Judges reviewed arguments in closed chambers. Rulings were issued carefully, often with written explanations citing precedent. Some evidence was limited. Other evidence was allowed in full. Public interest intensified. True crime communities began dissecting every available document. Media outlets published timelines. Experts debated interpretations. Misinformation spread alongside verified facts. The court imposed restrictions on what could be discussed publicly. Despite the noise, the case moved forward. Jury selection became a critical challenge. Attorneys questioned potential jurors extensively, probing for bias, prior exposure, and emotional thresholds. Several candidates were dismissed. Those selected were instructed to avoid coverage, discussion, and speculation. Opening statements marked the official beginning of the trial. The prosecution outlined a narrative built on evidence, not emotion. They emphasized records, timestamps, and expert conclusions. The defense countered with doubt, alternative explanations, and challenges to credibility. Witnesses took the stand one by one. First responders described what they saw. Investigators explained procedures. Forensic analysts walked jurors through scientific findings using diagrams and photographs approved by the court. Some testimony was clinical. Other moments were deeply emotional. The defense cross-examined aggressively, questioning assumptions, pointing out limitations, and highlighting areas where certainty was not absolute. This back and forth shaped the jury's understanding. Throughout the trial, the central question remained unchanged. What happened during the time no one could account for? Phone records alone could not answer it. Video footage alone could not explain intent. Forensics could indicate what occurred, but not always why. That burden fell on the totality of evidence. As the trial progressed, patterns emerged. Small details, once insignificant, began to align. A statement dismissed early gained relevance weeks later. A timeline gap narrowed. The prosecution believed they had proven their case. The defense believed they had raised enough doubt. When closing arguments approached, both sides prepared carefully. Every word mattered. Every inference carried weight. The jury would soon be asked to decide not just what happened, but whether the evidence met the highest legal standard required. And once deliberations began, the outcome would no longer be in the hands of investigators, attorneys, or experts. It would rest entirely with 12 people tasked with separating fact from speculation, truth from possibility, and justice from doubt. As deliberations drew closer, the trial entered its most scrutinized phase. Expert testimony became central. Specialists in digital forensics explained how data is created, stored, and sometimes altered. They clarified common misconceptions, emphasizing that absence of data does not always mean absence of activity. Jurors listened as timelines were rebuilt using multiple independent sources. Phone logs were compared with application metadata. Location services were analyzed alongside network records. Each data point was presented with limitations clearly stated. The prosecution stressed consistency. According to their argument, no single piece of evidence stood alone. Instead, each element reinforced the others. When combined, they formed a sequence that, in their view, could not reasonably be explained away. The defense countered with precision. They highlighted the margins of error. They questioned assumptions made during analysis. They reminded jurors that technology is not infallible and that interpretation often depends on context. Several witnesses acknowledged uncertainty under cross-examination. This did not invalidate their testimony, but it introduced nuance. Jurors were instructed to weigh credibility, expertise, and consistency rather than certainty alone. Midway through the proceedings, the court addressed procedural issues. Certain exhibits were restricted. Others were allowed with limiting instructions. The judge repeatedly reminded the jury to consider evidence only as presented in court. Outside the courtroom, speculation continued. Online discussions intensified. Commentators debated theories. Some narratives gained traction despite lacking evidentiary support. The court remained insulated, but the pressure was undeniable. When the state rested its case, attention shifted fully to the defense. Defense witnesses included experts offering alternative interpretations. They proposed scenarios that aligned with portions of the evidence while challenging the prosecution's conclusions. These alternatives did not need to be proven true. They only needed to be plausible. That distinction was emphasized repeatedly. Character witnesses also testified. They spoke about behavior, routines, and relationships. Their accounts were meant to humanize and contextualize rather than explain evidence directly. The prosecution cross-examined carefully, avoiding overreach. Rebuttal witnesses followed. The state addressed discrepancies raised by the defense, clarifying methodology and reinforcing key findings. Each rebuttal was tightly focused, avoiding emotional appeal. As testimony concluded, jurors received detailed instructions. They were reminded that sympathy could not guide their decision. They were told that speculation must not replace evidence. They were instructed to consider the case as a whole. Legal definitions were read aloud. Words like intent, knowledge, and responsibility were explained in precise language. Jurors were told exactly what the state was required to prove and what the defense was not required to prove. Closing arguments followed. The prosecution walked the jury through the timeline one final time. They highlighted moments where choices were made, actions taken, and consequences followed. They asked the jury to trust the evidence. The defense urged caution. They pointed to unanswered questions. They emphasized reasonable doubt. They reminded jurors that certainty is rare and that the law demands restraint when doubt remains. After instructions were repeated, the jury was sent to deliberate. The courtroom emptied. Deliberations were private, but later records would reveal their intensity. Jurors reviewed exhibits repeatedly. They requested clarification on testimony. They asked for timelines to be represented. Hours turned into days. Each vote required unanimity. Each juror had to be convinced beyond reasonable doubt. When the verdict was finally reached, the courtroom reconvened. The defendant stood. Attorneys rose. The judge addressed the jury. The verdict was read aloud. Reactions were restrained by design. No outbursts were permitted. The decision was entered into the record calmly, formally, and definitively. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date. In the aftermath, families responded in different ways. Some expressed relief. Others expressed grief. Statements were released through attorneys or read in court. The legal process had concluded, but the impact did not end there. Appeals were discussed almost immediately. Legal experts weighed potential grounds. Analysts reviewed trial strategy and evidentiary rulings. For the public, the case became part of a broader conversation. It raised questions about investigation methods, courtroom strategy, and the role of digital evidence in modern trials. For those directly affected, it marked a permanent turning point. And for the justice system, it served as another reminder that truth is often assembled slowly, carefully, and under intense scrutiny. Sentencing began weeks later. The courtroom atmosphere was noticeably different. The tension of uncertainty had been replaced by the weight of consequence. The verdict had settled the question of guilt. Now the court would decide punishment. Before sentencing, a pre-sentence investigation report was submitted. It summarized background information, psychological evaluations, and prior conduct. The judge reviewed it privately, along with written statements submitted by both sides. Victim impact statements were read aloud. Family members described loss in measured words. They spoke about absence, routines that no longer existed, and futures that would never happen. Each statement followed the same structure, restrained but deeply personal. The court listened without interruption. The defense also addressed the court. They acknowledged the verdict while asking for consideration of age, background, and the possibility of rehabilitation. They referenced statutory guidelines and precedent from similar cases. The prosecution responded with emphasis on severity. They outlined aggravating factors. They highlighted planning, deception, and post-offense behavior. Their position was clear. The sentence should reflect not only the crime, but the choices surrounding it. The judge spoke last. They explained how sentencing decisions are made. Factors were listed one by one. Statutory minimums, maximums, discretion allowed by law, public safety, deterrence, accountability. The sentence was pronounced. Life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after a fixed number of years. The words were delivered without inflection. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was entered into record. The defendant was escorted out. Outside the courthouse, reactions spread quickly. News outlets reported the sentence within minutes. Headlines focused on the length, the conditions, and the timeline for parole eligibility. Community response was divided. Some expressed relief, believing justice had been served. Others questioned whether any sentence could ever account for the harm done. Conversations extended beyond the case itself, touching on trust, safety, and accountability. For the family, the sentence did not mark an ending. Legal closure does not equal emotional resolution. The absence remained unchanged. The routine of court appearances ended, but grief continued privately. Advocacy followed. The case was cited in discussions about youth safety, digital evidence, and early warning signs. Community groups referenced it during educational programs. Law enforcement agencies reviewed investigative steps for training purposes. Years later, the case would still be referenced. Not because of novelty, but because of clarity. The evidence trail, the trial structure, and the outcome made it a point of reference in similar investigations. Appeal filings were submitted. Defense attorneys challenged procedural rulings and evidentiary decisions. Appellate courts reviewed transcripts line by line. Each claim was assessed against established standards. The conviction remained intact. With appeals exhausted, the sentence stood as imposed. Time moved forward unevenly. For the incarcerated, days were counted differently. For the community, the case slowly faded from headlines. For the family, time did not soften memory. True crime discussions continued. Online forums dissected details. Some focused on investigative choices. Others debated trial strategy. A few fixated on speculation, often disconnected from record evidence. Official records told a quieter story. Dates, documents, testimony, rulings, each preserved without emotion. When revisited years later, the case remained unchanged in the archive. What changed was interpretation. New audiences viewed it through different lenses. Technology advanced. Standards evolved. But the facts remained fixed. The case became a lesson, not in morality, but in process. How timelines are constructed. How evidence is weighed. How truth is argued rather than declared. It demonstrated how ordinary interactions can become critical data points. How digital footprints persist. How inconsistencies accumulate. Most of all, it showed how trust can obscure risk. The events did not occur in isolation. They unfolded within a community that believed familiarity equaled safety. That belief was challenged permanently. The record now stands as it was entered. A timeline, a verdict, a sentence, and a name that remains part of public record long after the courtroom doors closed. Years before the crime, no one saw warning signs clearly. In retrospect, details gained meaning. Behaviors once dismissed as immaturity or confidence were re-evaluated under a different lens. Patterns emerged only after consequences forced examination. Witness testimony later revealed moments that felt insignificant at the time. Casual remarks, shifts in tone, boundary testing behavior that went unchallenged. Individually, each moment appeared ordinary. Together, they formed a trajectory. The social environment played a role. In small communities, familiarity often replaces scrutiny. Long-term presence creates assumed credibility. History becomes a substitute for verification. This case exposed how that dynamic can fail. Several witnesses described interactions that now felt unsettling. At the time, they had rationalized them. Context normalized conduct that should have raised concern. The trial records captured these reflections in hindsight. One witness described moments of discomfort but said nothing felt serious enough to escalate. Another admitted noticing changes in behavior but assumed stress or personal issues were responsible. No single warning was definitive. The danger lay in accumulation. Experts later explained how escalation often works gradually. Boundaries are tested incrementally. Resistance is measured. Silence is interpreted as permission. These patterns rarely announce themselves clearly. The digital trail provided additional context. Recovered messages showed pressure framed as familiarity. Language that blurred consent. Requests repeated after hesitation. Tone shifting subtly from friendly to insistent. Individually, the messages seemed ambiguous. In sequence, intent became clearer. Investigators noted how timing mattered. Messages escalated shortly before the meeting. Hesitation was met with persistence. That persistence contradicted claims of spontaneity. Digital forensics removed ambiguity. Metadata established location. Timestamps confirmed proximity. Deleted messages were partially reconstructed, revealing content that contradicted verbal accounts. Technology did not interpret motives. It recorded actions. Physical evidence filled remaining gaps. Injuries documented by medical examiners aligned with witness statements and digital timelines. Each data point reinforced the same narrative. Defense arguments attempted to isolate evidence. They challenged each piece separately. They questioned relevance. They raised hypothetical alternatives. The prosecution focused on convergence. No single piece proved the case alone. Together, they formed a closed loop. Jurors later stated that consistency mattered most. Not drama. Not speculation. Consistency. Every source pointed in the same direction. The jury instructions emphasized this principle. Evidence must be weighed collectively, not selectively. The verdict reflected that approach. Beyond the courtroom, the case influenced policy discussions. Law enforcement agencies cited it when discussing digital evidence handling. Training sessions referenced it as an example of timeline reconstruction. Educators referenced it in discussions about online safety. Parents revisited assumptions about familiarity and trust. Schools updated guidance on digital interactions. The community itself changed. Events that once felt routine were reconsidered. Parents asked more questions. Teens were encouraged to document concerns. The case created awareness without intention. It became a reference point not by design, but by consequence. Media coverage evolved over time. Initial reports focused on disappearance. Later coverage examined investigation. Final reporting addressed sentencing and aftermath. Each phase reshaped public understanding. True crime audiences often encounter cases in compressed form. What unfolded over years is consumed in hours. Context can be lost without careful presentation. This case resists simplification. It is not defined by a single decision or moment. It unfolded through many small choices, each building toward an irreversible outcome. Responsibility was determined legally, but understanding requires broader reflection. The record shows how proximity can obscure risk, how assumptions replace verification, how silence allows escalation. None of these factors excuse the crime. They explain how it became possible. The archive remains available. Court transcripts, evidence logs, appellate rulings, each accessible to the public. They do not dramatize. They document. The facts stand unchanged regardless of interpretation. For those studying the case, the lesson is procedural. Pay attention to patterns. Trust timelines. Examine inconsistencies. Follow evidence without bias. Emotion belongs to impact statements. Truth belongs to records. The case now exists in both spaces. Memory and documentation. One continues to change. The other does not. As the trial progressed, expert testimony became central. Not speculation. Not opinion. Structured analysis grounded in data. Medical examiners explained injury patterns with precision. They outlined timelines based on tissue response, blood loss, and trauma indicators. Their conclusions did not rely on assumptions. They relied on biological markers that cannot be coached or altered. They explained how certain injuries occur only under specific conditions. Pressure duration, force direction, sequence. These details mattered. They established order. They ruled out alternative narratives. They showed that events unfolded in a narrow window of time. Digital analysts followed. They walked the jury through location pings, metadata, and device behavior. Each step was explained slowly. Screens were displayed. Time stamps were cross-referenced. The jury did not need to trust interpretation. They could see it. When the device stopped transmitting, both phones were in the same area. When movement resumed, only one device registered activity. Deleted data did not disappear completely. Fragments remained. Logs remained. Server records preserved interactions beyond the device itself. This was not coincidence. It was correlation repeated across systems. The defense attempted to create doubt by overwhelming detail. They suggested technological error. They raised questions about data integrity. They implied external interference. Experts responded methodically. They explained redundancies. How multiple independent systems confirmed the same locations. How margin of error still placed both devices together. Even the most generous variants could not separate them. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. Early sessions were tense, quiet, controlled. As evidence accumulated, tension turned into stillness. Observers later described the silence as heavy, not dramatic, resigned. The prosecution avoided emotional language. They relied on structure, timelines, evidence alignment. This strategy mattered. Jurors later said credibility came from restraint. No exaggeration, no speculation, only documentation. Character witnesses were limited. The court restricted testimony to relevant facts. Past reputation could not override present evidence. That boundary protected the integrity of the process. Closing arguments focused on responsibility, not emotion, not vengeance. Responsibility. The prosecution outlined the sequence once more. Each step aligned with evidence already presented. No new claims. No surprises. The defense emphasized uncertainty. They argued that unanswered questions created reasonable doubt. They suggested the absence of witnesses weakened the case. The jury instruction clarified this point. Lack of witnesses does not negate evidence. Isolation does not create doubt when corroboration exists. After deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. The sentence followed statutory guidelines. Life imprisonment with eligibility for parole after a defined period. The courtroom remained silent. There was no celebration. No visible reaction. Just acknowledgement. Impact statements were brief. They did not seek sympathy. They expressed absence. They spoke of routines interrupted, of spaces left empty. They did not address the defendant. They addressed the record. After sentencing, appeals were filed. Procedural review followed. Appellate courts examined evidence handling, jury instruction, and legal standards. The conviction was upheld. The record remained intact. The case entered archival status. For legal professionals, it became a reference. For the community, it became memory. For audiences, it became narrative. How it is told matters. Accuracy preserves dignity. Sensationalism distorts truth. This case demonstrates how documentation prevents distortion. Every claim can be traced. Every assertion can be verified. That transparency is rare. It is also necessary. True crime is not entertainment alone. It is examination. It asks how systems function under pressure, how evidence withstands challenge, how truth emerges without spectacle. This case offers that examination fully. No mystery remains unresolved. No theory remains unsupported. What remains is consequence. Lives altered. Trust reconsidered. Awareness increased. The legal process reached its conclusion. The human impact continues. That distinction matters. Cases end. Effects do not. Long after the verdict, the case continued to reshape how the community understood itself. Spring Creek was a place built on familiarity. People knew faces, families, routines. Trust was assumed, not negotiated. That assumption did not survive this case. Parents spoke differently to their children. Conversations changed. Rules that once felt unnecessary became standard. Not out of fear, but awareness. The investigation exposed a critical truth. Danger does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes it grows inside what feels safe. Law enforcement later acknowledged that the case forced internal review. Investigators re-examined early assumptions, especially the instinct to trust familiarity over verification. Being known is not the same as being known well. That distinction shaped future training. Digital evidence became central in subsequent cases. Snap map data, metadata recovery, and device correlation were no longer treated as supplemental. They became foundational. This case accelerated that shift. It showed how behavior leaves traces even when someone believes they have erased them. Movement. Proximity. Technology does not forget easily. The prosecution's reliance on digital forensics set a precedent in the region. Smaller departments began collaborating earlier with state-level analysts. Delays caused by limited resources were addressed through new protocols. The system adapted. For educators and parents, the case raised difficult questions about adolescence. How much independence is appropriate? How well online interactions reflect reality? How trust should be layered, not absolute? Britney was not reckless. That point mattered. She followed routine. She communicated. She trusted someone approved by her family and community. That trust was weaponized. The narrative that young victims act irresponsibly did not apply here, and that challenged stereotypes. Media coverage initially struggled with tone. Early reports focused on mystery. Later ones shifted to evidence. Some outlets corrected inaccuracies after public pressure. Responsible reporting became part of the conversation. Audiences demanded sourcing, timelines, clarification. True crime consumers were no longer passive. They questioned framing. They checked facts. They noticed omissions. This case contributed to that shift. It reminded viewers that real people exist behind headlines. The legal outcome closed one chapter but opened others. Civil discussions followed. Policy discussions followed. Advocacy groups cited the case when pushing for education around consent, coercion, and recognizing subtle warning signs in relationships. Not dramatic red flags. Quiet ones. Disregarded boundaries. Dismissed discomfort. Patterns explained away as personality. Those patterns were visible here, only in hindsight. Hindsight is always clearer. But awareness can shorten the distance between warning and response. Britney's story is not about unpredictability. It is about overlooked consistency. The same behavior appeared across contexts. The same disregard for limits. The same need for control. Once identified, it was unmistakable. That recognition matters for prevention, for future cases, for future lives. The justice system functioned as designed in the end, but it relied heavily on persistence. Evidence did not announce itself. It had to be recovered, interpreted, defended. That work took time. Time that families experience differently than courts do. Grief does not follow procedure. It exists outside timelines. The verdict did not restore what was lost. It clarified responsibility. That distinction is important. Justice is not healing. It is accountability. Healing occurs elsewhere. Slowly, unevenly. Some wounds never close. The case remains referenced not because of spectacle, but because of structure. Because it shows how truth can be established methodically, without theatrics. Because it demonstrates how systems can work when pressure does not override process. And because it reminds viewers why accuracy matters. True crime is often consumed quickly. This case resists that. It requires patience, attention. It asks the audience not just to watch, but to understand. To recognize patterns. To question assumptions. To remember that trust should be informed, not automatic. And that silence, especially digital silence, is rarely empty. It is often full of answers waiting to be recovered. As the years passed, Britney's case continued to surface in classrooms, courtrooms, and community discussions far beyond Elko County. Criminal justice programs used it to demonstrate how modern investigations unfold. Not through a single breakthrough, but through accumulation. Small facts, quiet contradictions, digital shadows. Students studying forensic science analyzed the evidence chain. How location data intersected with physical findings. How deleted content was reconstructed. How timelines were tested against reality rather than narrative. The case became a reference point. For prosecutors, it reinforced a difficult lesson. Jurors do not need spectacle. They need clarity. In this trial, the evidence spoke without embellishment. Each piece stood on its own, but together formed an unbroken sequence. There were no dramatic confessions. No surprise witnesses. Just consistency. That consistency proved decisive. Defense strategies that rely on confusion fail when facts align across independent sources. Here, phones, DNA, injuries, and geography all told the same story. Separately, each raised suspicion. Together, they removed doubt. This alignment is rare. And when it happens, it reshapes how future cases are built. The role of digital platforms also came under scrutiny. Snapchat cooperated with lawful data requests. Analysts explained how metadata functions independently of user deletion. Even when content disappears visually, system-level information often remains. Time stamps, location pings, device identifiers. These elements operate silently in the background of everyday life. Most users never consider them. Until they matter. Privacy advocates noted the balance required. Data recovery solved this case, but it also raised broader questions about access and oversight. Those debates continue. But the reality remains. Digital behavior leaves trails. In parallel, victim advocacy organizations emphasized the importance of narrative control. Early speculation nearly distorted public understanding. Unverified rumors spread faster than facts. Once corrected, trust had to be rebuilt. This case highlighted the responsibility of both creators and consumers. Accuracy protects victims. Speed does not. For Britney's family, The aftermath was quieter. Public attention moved on. Their reality did not. They focused on preserving her memory without allowing it to be defined solely by how she died. Friends remembered her laugh, her patience with animals, her seriousness when talking about the future. Those details mattered. They restored balance to a story often dominated by violence. Community memorials shifted tone over time. From grief to reflection. From anger to resolve. The message changed. This should not happen again. That message carried weight. Local programs were introduced addressing teen relationship dynamics, consent education, and digital awareness. Not as reaction, as prevention. The case also altered how missing persons reports were treated in the region. Response timelines tightened. Assumptions were challenged earlier. Last known contacts were scrutinized sooner. These procedural changes did not erase the past, but they honored it. Britney's case is not remembered because it was unusual. It is remembered because it was plausible. Everything about it fit comfortably into normal life. And that is what made it dangerous. There was no dramatic break from routine. No sudden disappearance into the unknown. Just a short ride. A familiar face. A trusted connection. That familiarity delayed suspicion. The investigation had to overcome that delay. It did, but only after harm had already occurred. This reality unsettles audiences because it removes distance. It suggests that prevention is not about predicting extremes. It is about noticing patterns. About listening when something feels off. About recognizing that respect for boundaries is not optional. It is foundational. When that respect erodes, consequences follow. Sometimes invisibly, until they cannot be ignored. This case also changed how jurors viewed circumstantial evidence. The term often carries misunderstanding. Circumstantial does not mean weak. It means indirect. And when multiple indirect facts converge, they become powerful. Here, convergence was undeniable. That lesson extends beyond courtrooms. In life, patterns matter more than isolated moments. Britney's story illustrates that truth. The silence after her phone went dark. The contradictions in one person's account. The physical evidence aligning with digital data. Each element reinforced the other. None stood alone. Together, they formed certainty. The responsibility of telling this story lies not in retelling violence, but in preserving understanding. Why it happened. How it was uncovered. What can be learned. True crime at its best does not exploit tragedy. It examines it. Carefully. Respectfully. With purpose. And when done well, it leaves the audience more aware than entertained. That awareness is the legacy this case demands. After the verdict, the community faced a long period of reflection. The small town of Spring Creek, once tightly knit, now had to reconcile trust with reality. Parents, neighbors, and teens alike questioned assumptions they had once taken for granted. Local schools organized seminars on recognizing warning signs in friendships and relationships. Lessons included discussions on consent, manipulation, and the importance of reporting unusual behavior early. Britney's story became the centerpiece, not for sensationalism, but for education. Digital safety workshops also emerged. Teens were taught how to safeguard their location, privacy, and communications. Snapchat, Instagram, and other platforms were used as case studies to illustrate both risks and tools available for protection. Students learned how metadata works, why deleted messages may remain accessible, and how to monitor for potential threats responsibly. At the same time, law enforcement departments across Nevada updated protocols. The Elko County Sheriff's Office led efforts in refining missing person investigations. Coordinated communication between local authorities, tech companies, and volunteer search teams became standard practice. Response time for reports was shortened, and investigative steps were pre-planned for rapid action. Forensics programs highlighted the Britney case in curriculum. Professors emphasized the interplay between digital and physical evidence. DNA analysis, metadata, and timestamp data were presented not as abstract concepts but as critical investigative tools. Students examined how minor inconsistencies in narratives can unravel fabricated stories when cross-referenced with hard evidence. Therapists and social workers addressed the psychological aftermath for families in cases like this. Trauma counseling, community support, and structured grieving processes were provided to those impacted. The role of public speculation was also discussed. Rumors, social media theories, and inaccurate news coverage can worsen grief and complicate investigations. Awareness campaigns emphasized empathy and verification before sharing information. Britney's parents became advocates for child safety. They collaborated with local organizations to raise awareness on the importance of listening to teens, monitoring peer interactions, and understanding the digital landscape. Their message remained clear: trust is vital, but vigilance is essential. Teaching young people about boundaries, communication, and respect became a family mission. Meanwhile, the trial itself served as a model for judicial transparency. Prosecutors demonstrated how combining circumstantial, digital, and forensic evidence leads to a fair and just outcome. The jury deliberated for less than 24 hours, proving the impact of meticulous, organized presentation of facts. The case reinforced confidence in the legal system while highlighting the complexity of modern crime investigations. Experts noted that the alignment of evidence, phone data, location pings, DNA, and physical trauma illustrated a blueprint for future investigations. Cases previously dismissed due to lack of direct witness testimony could now rely on a convergence of independent facts. This approach increases both accuracy and reliability of verdicts. Community programs grew from lessons learned. Local rodeo groups incorporated educational sessions on safe relationships. Youth centers emphasized personal awareness and accountability. Summer camps included classes on social media literacy, digital hygiene, and conflict resolution. These preventative measures aim to reduce vulnerabilities and encourage open dialogue between teens and adults. Media outlets highlighted the importance of responsible reporting. The initial public frenzy, driven by speculation, underscored the consequences of misinformation. Subsequent coverage shifted toward verified updates, survivor advocacy, and educational content. True crime channels and news programs now have a framework for responsible storytelling, ensuring victims and families are honored without exploitation. Britney's case continues to be studied by criminologists, digital forensic specialists, and sociologists. The lessons resonate beyond Nevada. Patterns of trust, abuse, digital footprints, and community involvement provide valuable insights for anyone invested in crime prevention. Through all this, Britney's memory remains central. Memorials honor her life, passions, and accomplishments. Her family, friends, and community ensure her story carries not just grief, but purpose. It is a reminder that tragedy can foster change, that education can arise from loss, and that vigilance in both personal and digital spaces is essential for safety. By examining how ordinary routines, familiar faces, and unnoticed behavior converge in dangerous ways, society gains perspective. The lessons extend beyond crime enthusiasts. They apply to every parent, teen, and neighbor. Awareness, respect, and action become tools for prevention. The case demonstrates that justice is not instantaneous. It is built through careful observation, meticulous analysis, and persistent dedication to uncovering truth. Britney's story reminds viewers that while evil may operate quietly, diligence, technology, and human observation can restore balance and accountability. Ultimately, the legacy is dual: remembrance and reform. Communities now navigate trust with informed caution. Teens learn the importance of boundaries and communication. Law enforcement evolves with technological integration. Families engage proactively in education and awareness. Britney's name now symbolizes vigilance, learning, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As the story of Britney Weaki concludes, the impact resonates far beyond Spring Creek. Her case became a catalyst for nationwide discussions about teen safety, the dangers of misplaced trust, and the intersection of digital technology and criminal behavior. Parents across the U.S. began re-evaluating how much autonomy they grant teenagers, especially regarding social media. conversations about consent, boundaries, and situational awareness gained new urgency. Community meetings and webinars highlighted concrete steps families could take to safeguard young people without stifling independence. Cybersecurity experts also took note. They emphasized the importance of metadata, GPS tracking, and digital footprints in investigations. The recovery of Snapchat data in Britney's case demonstrated how modern tools can hold perpetrators accountable even when physical witnesses are absent. The intersection of tech and forensics is now a standard teaching point in law enforcement training programs. Law enforcement agencies have since reviewed their protocols for missing persons and homicide cases. Multi-agency coordination, rapid evidence collection, and careful digital forensics now feature prominently in training. Elko County, Nevada, became a model for smaller jurisdictions on balancing local knowledge with advanced investigative techniques. Meanwhile, schools incorporated lessons from the case into health and safety curriculums. Teenagers were educated on the potential risks of casual encounters, the importance of communication, and strategies for checking in with trusted adults. Workshops stressed the role of peer accountability, encouraging students to report suspicious behavior or pressure from friends or acquaintances. True crime enthusiasts and educational channels have since highlighted Britney's story as a case study. They emphasize the convergence of warning signs, environmental context, and forensic evidence. It serves as a blueprint for understanding how seemingly safe communities can harbor hidden dangers and how vigilance, combined with technology, can save lives. Mental health professionals also weighed in. The psychological impact on communities experiencing such crimes is profound. Counseling services, support groups, and public awareness campaigns now address both immediate trauma and long-term emotional health. Families are encouraged to discuss difficult topics openly while maintaining a balance between protection and trust. Britney's family remains an active voice in advocacy. They collaborate with organizations focused on teen empowerment, child protection, and safe digital practices. Their mission is to turn personal tragedy into education and actionable guidance, ensuring that her story prevents future harm wherever possible. Social media platforms began implementing additional safeguards for minors. Location tracking, restricted messaging, and privacy alerts became more prominent features. Britney's case underscored the duality of social media. It can facilitate connection and safety but also amplify risks when misused. The broader impact extends to policy discussions. Lawmakers and child protection advocates now reference cases like Britney's when proposing updates to digital safety laws, privacy regulations, and educational requirements for teens. Ensuring that young people understand their rights and the tools available for protection has become a legislative priority. Finally, Britney's legacy is one of remembrance and reform. Memorials honor her vibrant life, while her story continues to educate families, law enforcement, and communities. Her name symbolizes vigilance, courage, and the pursuit of justice, ensuring that even in tragedy, meaningful change is possible. Through this case, viewers understand that safety is multifaceted. It involves awareness, technology, communication, and a supportive community. Britney Weaki's story reminds us that vigilance saves lives, and that educating our children, neighbors, and communities creates resilience against hidden dangers. Her memory lives on, not only in the hearts of her family but in the lessons that guide communities across the nation. Each action taken, from digital awareness to active bystander intervention, becomes a tribute to her life and a safeguard for the future. This is a story that demands attention, reflection, and action. By learning from the events surrounding Britney Weaki's disappearance and tragic death, we honor her legacy and commit to building safer environments for all young people. The case may have ended in a courtroom verdict, but its real impact continues in education, awareness, and reform. Britney's story remains a cautionary tale, a call to vigilance, and a powerful reminder that one life lost can inspire widespread change.